The doll split open in his hands, and what fell out made the biker's blood run cold, because the 8-year-old who'd been running barefoot for 15 miles wasn't fleeing an angry mother. She was running from something so dark that judges, senators, and police were willing to kill everyone in this room to keep it buried. They had 1 hour before the people on those recordings came for her. Grateful for every one of you watching. Subscribe if you're locked in, and tell me where you're tuning in from. Back to the story. A little black girl ran into the road like something hunted, 8 years old with bare feet bleeding and a doll in her fists, and when she screamed, "Hide me from my mama!" at 2 bikers who society called trash, she didn't know she was handing them evidence that would crack open a trafficking ring. She just knew that monsters in leather might be gentler than the angel who tucked her into bed. The roar of twin Harleys died like a held breath as Tony Gatson and John Flanaga eased to a stop on a cracked 2-lane that ran between pines and shuttered farmhouses. The Tennessee heat had broken an hour before, leaving the asphalt slick with that particular September moisture that smelled of rust and coming storms. Exhaust hung in the air like ghosts, and the only sound for 3 heartbeats was the tick-tick-tick of cooling engines and something small and desperate gasping for air. Tony killed his bike first. At 46, he moved like a man who'd learned to read trouble in the shape of shadows, shoulders forward, weight distributed, one boot hitting pavement before the kickstand was fully down. His leather cut bore the Road King's patch across shoulders that had carried bodies out of Fallujah and guilt ever since. Scars mapped his knuckles like a prisoner's calendar, and his dark eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone who'd stopped sleeping well around the same time his daughter's coffin went into Tennessee clay. The cancer had taken her 3 years ago. Some nights he could still hear her laugh. John Flanaga was slower, more deliberate. 51 years old with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a leather tie and hands that had once held surgical tools before pills stole his medical license and pride. He'd been sober 7 years, 2 months and 16 days, not that anyone was counting except him and God in that order. Where Tony wore his damage on the outside, John kept his buried in the careful measured way he did everything. 1 breath, 1 choice, 1 moment of not falling back into the hole that had swallowed a decade of his life. That's when the light hit her. Small. Maybe 8 years old, maybe younger. Hard to tell with the way terror shrinks children down to something barely there. Her skin was deep brown, darker in the halogen wash from the bikes, and her hair had been braided into cornrows that were coming apart, plastic beads clicking with each heaving breath. Bare feet, toes caked in mud and blood from God knew how many miles. A pink backpack hung from one shoulder by a broken strap that dragged behind her like a wounded wing, and in both hands, clutched so tight her knuckles had gone pale, was a doll. Not a nice doll. Not the kind you'd see in a store window or wrapped in Christmas paper. This thing looked like it had survived a war, fabric body sagging, one button eye hanging loose on a thread, stitching coming undone along the back seemed like something had been trying to claw its way out. Or in. She ran into the lane and screamed, "Please, please hide me from my mom." The words landed like a pistol shot beneath the bike's echo. Tony's hand moved instinctively toward the Glock he kept tucked beneath his cut, force of habit from years of riding through territory where patches and colors meant shoot-first diplomacy. But this wasn't an ambush. Wasn't a rival club making a move. This was a child, and the fear radiating off her was so thick he could taste it, metallic and sharp like blood in the back of his throat. John was already moving, helmet coming off in one smooth motion, hands held low and visible like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Easy now, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying the gentle authority from his old life. Before addiction, before prison, before redemption found him in a church basement. "Nobody's going to hurt you." "She will." The girl's voice cracked, high and desperate. "She'll find me, she always finds me when I run, but this time I have." She pressed the doll against her chest, small body curling around it protectively. "Don't let her take it back. Please." Tony dropped to one knee despite his bad leg screaming protest, souvenir from an IED outside Ramadi that the VA said would hurt until the day he died. He kept his hands visible, his voice low. "What's your name, kiddo?" "Barbara." She said it like a confession. Like giving her name away meant losing the last piece of herself she had left. "Barbara Whitson. I'm 8 3/4. Barbara." Tony repeated it, testing the weight. "That's a strong name. My grandma's name was Barbara. Toughest woman I ever knew." He nodded toward the darkness behind her, where the road disappeared into pines that looked black as sin. "Who's chasing you?" "My mama." The words came out broken, stitched together from fear and something worse, something that sounded like shame. Evala. Evala Whitson. She'll tell you I'm lying. She's good at that. She works downtown, wears nice clothes, everybody thinks, her voice splintered. But she's not. She's not good. She hurts me. She lets other people hurt me. And when I tried to tell, when I showed the teacher my arm, Mama said I was clumsy and the teacher believed her because Mama donates to the school and... Slow down, baby girl. John had moved closer, his face doing that thing it did when he was processing trauma. Jaw tight, eyes soft, that weird combination of stone and water. You're safe right now. Right here, right now, you're safe. Nobody's safe. Barbara's eyes were too old for her face, too knowing. Not while she's out there. Not while they're still. She looked down at the doll, and something passed across her face that made Tony's stomach turn to lead. She'll kill me if she finds this. She'll kill you too if you don't give it back. Tony's eyes met John's over the child's head. A whole conversation passed in that glance, the kind that happens between men who'd ridden together long enough to know each other's demons by name. Let's get you somewhere warm, Tony said, shrugging out of his leather jacket. It was massive on her, swallowing her small frame like a tent, but she grabbed at it with desperate hands, pulling it close. There's a place up the road. Rusty's. Good people. We can figure things out. No police. The panic in her voice was immediate, absolute, the kind that comes from learning too young that the people supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. She knows them. She knows all of them. They won't believe me, they never believe. No police yet, Tony agreed, though the word yet sat heavy in his throat. But we need to make sure you're safe first. John was already scanning the road, his medic instincts from another life kicking in. Can you ride? He asked Barbara. Just for a few miles. I'll go slow, and you hold on tight. She nodded, and John lifted her carefully onto the back of his Harley, adjusting the jacket so it wouldn't catch in the wheel, showing her where to grip. She kept the doll crushed between them, its button eyes staring at Tony with what almost felt like accusation. As John's engine rumbled to life, Tony noticed something he'd missed before. The doll's back seam was coming undone, not torn, but deliberately loosened, hand-stitched thread pulled carefully away to reveal darker fabric beneath. Like a pocket. Like a hiding place. And there, just visible where Barbara's thumb pressed against the stitching, was a stain that might have been rust or might have been something that made Tony's blood run cold. The ride to Rusty's took 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. Tony kept his bike close to John's, eyes constantly checking the rear view for following headlights, for any sign that Barbara's terror had shape and substance behind it. The girl's small arms were locked around John's waist, her face pressed against his back, and even over the engine noise Tony could hear her, not crying, but making these small, swallowed sounds that spoke of practice at staying silent. When they pulled into Rusty's gravel lot, the bar's neon sign, a rusted motorcycle with wings that had been there since the 70s, cast everything in shades of red and gold that looked like prophecy or warning, depending on how you tilted your head. 3 other bikes sat in their usual spots, Marcus's Softail, Diego's Chopper, Tommy's Road King. Good. If this situation was heading where Tony's gut said it was heading, they'd need the whole crew. John killed his engine and helped Barbara down, her bare feet touching gravel with a wince that made him scowl. Tony was already moving toward the door when she spoke again, her voice so small he almost missed it. The doll knows everything. She held it up with both hands, like an offering or a weapon. That's why Mama wants it back so bad. That's why she'll hurt anyone who tries to keep me. It's all in here, all the proof, everything they thought nobody would ever find. Tony stopped with his hand on the door handle, looking back at the little girl swimming in his jacket, at the ratty doll with its loose stitching and rust-colored stains, at John's face going pale in the neon glow. Barbara, John said carefully, each word chosen like he was defusing a bomb, what's inside the doll? She met his eyes, and in that moment she looked ancient, older than any child should ever look, aged by things no 8-year-old should know existed. Truth, she whispered. All the truth Mama thought she buried deep enough that nobody would dig it up. Tony pushed open the door to warmth and cigarette smoke, to the low murmur of Saturday night conversation and the crack of pool balls. Marcus looked up from his corner booth, 6'3" of former Army Ranger with a beard going gray and eyes that still swept rooms like he was clearing houses in Kandahar, and read the situation in 3 seconds flat. We got a problem, Tony? Marcus asked, his voice carrying that command presence he'd never quite shed. Tony glanced at Barbara, at the doll in her hands, at the way she was trembling despite the jacket and the warmth and John's hand steady on her shoulder. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think we just inherited one." The door to Rusty's swung shut behind them with a sound like a coffin closing. And in the darkness of the parking lot, unseen by the bikers, a pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the gravel drive, engine idling, patient, waiting like a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. Inside the bar, nobody noticed when Mikey Reese, youngest of the Road Kings, 28 and always a little too eager to prove himself, pulled out his phone with shaking hands and typed a message to a number he'd been told to use only in emergencies. "They have the girl. And the doll." The response came back in seconds. "Keep them there. We're coming." Mikey's thumb hovered over the delete button. Outside, Barbara's small voice drifted through the walls, asking if anyone had bandages for her feet. Asking if someone could get her a glass of water. Asking if she was really, finally safe. Mikey deleted the message thread and put his phone away. Some debts, he thought, cost too much to pay. But in 3 hours, he'd learned that some debts collect themselves, with interest and blood, and the kind of consequences that don't ask permission. Rusty's Roadhouse smelled like 3 decades of spilled beer motor oil, and the kind of cigarette smoke that had soaked so deep into the wood it would outlive everyone in the room. The jukebox in the corner played Lynyrd Skynyrd at half volume, and the walls were covered in framed photos of bikes, brothers, and women who'd long since moved on to quieter men. A Confederate flag hung near the pool table, not politics, just history that nobody had bothered to take down, and the bar itself was scarred oak that had absorbed more confessions than any priest. Marcus stood as they entered, his bulk blocking out half the neon Budweiser sign behind him. Diego Ruiz looked up from his whiskey, lean face registering concern the moment he saw Barbara. Tommy O'Brien, massive hands wrapped around a pool cue, froze mid-shot. And in the corner booth, Mikey Reese, baby-faced and trying too hard to look hard, glanced up from his phone with an expression Tony couldn't quite read. "The hell?" Diego said, his voice carrying that street corner rasp from 15 years upstate. "Tony, you kidnapping children now?" She ran into the road. Tony's voice was flat, drained, barefoot, bleeding, begging us to hide her from her mother. Her mother. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What kind of mother? "The kind that needs hiding from," John interrupted, guiding Barbara toward the booth furthest from the windows. "Tommy, get the first aid kit. Diego, check the parking lot, make sure nobody followed us." The bikers moved without question, years of riding together creating a rhythm that didn't need explanation. Marcus grabbed a clean bar towel and wet it at the sink. Tommy disappeared into the back room. Diego slipped out the front door, hand hovering near the blade he kept in his boot. Barbara stood in the middle of the bar, still clutching the doll, Tony's jacket hanging off her like she was playing dress-up in her father's closet. Her eyes swept the room, cataloging exits, counting threats, calculating odds with the grim efficiency of someone who'd learned young that survival meant always knowing where the doors were. "Sit down, baby girl," John said gently, patting the cracked vinyl booth. "Let's get those feet cleaned up." She didn't move. "You gonna call the police?" "That's what we're debating," Tony said, his voice harder than he intended. He caught John's warning look and softened. "But right now, we're just trying to help." "Okay." Barbara nodded slowly and slid into the booth, but she kept the doll in her lap, arms wrapped around it like a life preserver. When Tommy returned with the first aid kit, she flinched, and John had to murmur reassurances before she'd let anyone touch her feet. Marcus pulled up a chair backwards, straddling it with his arms crossed over the back. "You got a name, little one?" "Barbara Whitson." She said it quieter this time, like the walls might have ears. "I'm 8 3/4. I lived, on Pine Hollow Road. The yellow house with the broken fence." Tony felt something cold slide down his spine. He knew that house. Everyone in Clarksville knew that house, or at least the woman who lived there. Evala Whitson. Real estate agent. Chamber of Commerce member. The kind of woman who showed up at town hall meetings in pearls and sensible heels, always smiling, always involved. "Your mama," Tony said carefully, "she's Evala Whitson? Works at Prestige Properties downtown." Barbara nodded, her small hands tightening on the doll. "She's real good at pretending. Everyone thinks she's nice. She donates to the church. She sponsors Little League teams." Her voice dropped to a whisper. But at night, when people come over, when the men with cash come knocking, she's different. She's easy, John murmured, dabbing antiseptic on a particularly bad cut. You don't have to tell us everything right now. Yes, I do. Barbara's voice cracked with desperation. Because if I don't tell you, you won't believe me when she comes. You'll think I'm just some bad kid making up stories. That's what Mrs. Chun said when I told her at school. That's what Officer Paulson said when he came to the house and Mama cried and showed him my report card with all the bad grades and said I was acting out because my daddy left. She was breathing too fast now, small chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. But I'm not lying. I'm not. And this, she thrust the doll forward. This proves it. This proves everything. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle despite his size. What's in the doll, sweetheart? I can show you. Barbara's fingers moved to the loose stitching along the doll's back. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And they'll come for you too. Everyone who knows becomes a problem Mama has to fix. Tony and John exchanged another loaded glance. This was the moment. The fork in the road where they either walked away, called CPS, handed her over to the system, went back to their bikes and their bar and their carefully maintained distance from the world's ugliness, or they stepped over a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Show us, Tony said. Barbara's fingers trembled as she worked the stitching loose. The thread came away easily, like it had been opened and resewn many times before. The fabric parted, revealing a hollow space inside the doll's body where stuffing should have been. Instead, there were secrets. 3 micro SD cards, each labeled in a child's careful handwriting, March, May, June, August, September now. A roll of bills, not ones or fives, but hundreds, maybe $2,000 wrapped in a rubber band. A folded square of paper that looked like it had been torn from a ledger, covered in names and numbers. And wrapped in a scrap of pink fabric, preserved like evidence, was a bloodstain so dark it looked black. Sweet Jesus, Marcus breathed. John's hands, steady through 2 tours in Afghanistan and 7 years of sobriety, shook as he reached for one of the SD cards. Barbara, what's on these? Videos. Her voice was flat, dead, the tone of someone reciting facts about the weather. From the camera Mama thinks is just for home security. But I figured out how to copy files to the cards. There's men. Lots of men. Some of them I recognize. They're on TV sometimes, or in the newspaper. And there's me. And she stopped, her small body starting to shake. There's bad things. Things Mama said would be my fault if anyone found out. Things she said meant I was dirty and broken, and nobody would ever want me anyway. The room had gone silent except for the jukebox, which had moved on to some country ballad about trucks and heartbreak, oblivious to the fact that the world had just tilted on its axis. Tommy, big gentle Tommy who fixed bikes and donated to animal shelters, made a sound low in his throat like a wounded animal. Diego had come back inside at some point and stood frozen near the door, his scarred face carved from granite. Even Mikey had gone pale, his phone forgotten on the table in front of him. Tony felt rage building in his chest, the kind of fury he hadn't felt since Fallujah, since the day his convoy had rolled past a school that insurgents had rigged with explosives, since he'd pulled pieces of children from rubble while their mothers screamed. This was different and exactly the same, evil that targeted the small and defenseless, evil that hid behind smiles and respectability. We call the police, he said, his voice rough. Right now. We call them, we hand over the evidence, and we let the system. The system. Barbara's laugh was bitter, ancient, wrong coming from an 8-year-old's mouth. Officer Paulson is on the videos. So is Judge Matthews. So is Mr. Chun from Child Protective Services. She looked up at Tony with eyes that had seen too much. The system is how Mama gets away with it. The system is what she pays for with money and favors and me. John had picked up the folded paper, his face going gray as he scanned the names. Tony, look at this. The ledger page listed dates, amounts, and initials. But it was the notes in the margin that made Tony's blood run cold. JP courthouse access, DM case dismissals, RC foster placements. They're not just customers, John said quietly. They're infrastructure. She's not running he glanced at Barbara and edited himself. She's not working alone. She's got protection at every level. Then we go above them, Tony said, but even he could hear the desperation in his voice. FBI. State police. Someone who isn't local, who isn't. How long do you think it takes to activate that kind of help? Marcus had stood, his command voice cutting through the debate. Days? Weeks? And meanwhile, this child's mother knows she's missing. Knows she ran. Knows that doll is gone. He looked at Barbara with something like awe. How long before she figures out where you went, little one? She already knows. Barbara's voice was small again, childlike. I heard her on the phone before I ran. She was calling people, angry, scared people. She knows I have the doll. She knows what's in it. A tear slid down her cheek. She said if I wasn't back by midnight, she'd have to clean up the mess I made. That's what she calls it when people disappear. Cleaning up. Tony checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes. We can't hand her over, John said, and it wasn't a question. Not to local cops. Not to CPS. Not to anyone in that ledger. So what? Tony demanded. We hide her here? Wait for Evala Whitson and her network of corrupt officials to kick down the door. We fight, Marcus said simply. Like we always do when the system fails. We're not vigilantes, Marcus. No, we're men with a code. Marcus's eyes were hard. And the code says you don't turn away a child in danger. Not ever. Not for any reason. Tommy nodded. Diego's hand had gone to his knife again, ready. Even Mikey, nervous, baby-faced Mikey, met Tony's eyes and nodded. Tony felt something shift in his chest, that same feeling from his army days when the mission parameters changed and you realized you weren't going home the same person who deployed. He looked at Barbara, still clutching the doll's empty husk, her feet wrapped in clean bandages, her eyes hopeful and terrified in equal measure. All right, he said. We hide her. We protect the evidence. And we figure out who we can trust to. His phone buzzed. Everyone froze. Tony pulled it out slowly, like it might explode. The screen showed a text from a blocked number. We know you have the girl. Return her and the doll within the hour, and we'll forget this ever happened. Refuse, and we'll make examples of all of you. Jesus, Diego whispered. Before anyone could respond, footsteps thundered across the gravel parking lot outside. Heavy boots. Multiple people. Moving fast. Marcus was already heading for the back door. Tommy, get the shotgun from the office. Diego, windows. John, get the girl somewhere safe. The front door exploded inward, kicked off its hinges with professional force. And standing in the doorway, backlit by neon and headlights, were 3 men in tactical gear that screamed private security or off-duty cops. The one in front held a badge in one hand and a weapon in the other. Clarksville PD, he announced, though his eyes said he was something else entirely. We've had reports of a kidnapped child. Barbara Whitson. We're here to bring her home safely. Barbara made a sound like a wounded animal and tried to burrow into John's side. The doll's SD card sat on the table between them, small and damning and impossible to hide. Tony's hand moved toward his Glock. The man with the badge smiled, and it was the coldest thing in a room full of hard men and terrible truths. Let's all stay calm, he said. Nobody has to get hurt. Just hand over the girl and whatever she stole from her mother, and we can all go home tonight. Outside, more engines rumbled to life. More footsteps. More shadows moving in the dark. They were surrounded. And the clock was ticking. Tony's Glock cleared leather before his brain finished processing the threat. Don't. The word came from Marcus, low and commanding, his hand gripping Tony's wrist with a kind of pressure that brooked no argument. Not yet. The man in the doorway, badge glinting in the neon wash, tactical vest straining over a gym-built frame, smiled wider. His name tag read Shaw, and Tony recognized him from Barbara's ledger, DS evidence tampering, case dismissals. Smart, Shaw said, his weapon still pointed at the floor, but his finger resting too close to the trigger guard. Real smart. Now, the girl. Let's not make this complicated. Barbara had gone rigid against John's side, her small body trembling so hard the booth was shaking. Her eyes had glazed over, pupils blown wide, and her breathing had turned shallow and rapid, the kind of panic response Tony had seen in combat, when the mind checks out because staying present means breaking. She's having a panic attack, John said quietly, his medic training kicking in even as his free hand moved to cover the SD cards on the table. She needs to breathe. She needs to come home to her mother, Shaw interrupted. Mrs. Whitson is worried sick. Filed a missing persons report 2 hours ago. Said her daughter ran away after a disagreement about homework. His eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, positions, threat assessments. Said the girl has a tendency to lie. To make up stories for attention. Attention. Diego's voice dripped venom. That what you call it when an 8-year-old has cigarette burns on her arms? Shaw's smile didn't falter. I haven't seen any burns. All I see is a frightened child and a bunch of bikers with records long enough to wallpaper this shithole. He took a step inside. Now Barbara, honey, your mama's waiting. She's got your favorite dinner ready. Mac and cheese, right? With the breadcrumbs on top. Barbara made a sound like a sob trapped in her throat. And suddenly she wasn't in Rusty's anymore. The living room. 3 weeks ago. Maybe 4. Time blurred when you spent most of it trying to be invisible. Barbara had woken to shouting, Mama's voice, sharp and cold like breaking glass. Male voices answering, angry, demanding. She'd crept to the top of the stairs, small hands gripping the banister, peering through the railings. Mama stood in the center of the room wearing the silk robe she only wore for special visitors, her hair perfect despite the late hour, her face a mask of controlled fury. 3 men surrounded her. Suits, expensive shoes, the kind of men who appeared in newspapers and shook hands with the mayor. I don't care what you promised him, one of them snarled. The shipment was supposed to be clean. Untraceable. Instead, we've got federal eyes on the distribution network and a paper trail that leads straight back to. Lower your voice. Mama's tone could have frozen fire. The child sleeps upstairs. The child. Another man laughed, ugly and knowing. Right. Your little insurance policy. How long until she becomes a liability, Evola? How long until she sees something, says something? She's 8. She's terrified of me. She knows what happens to little girls who talk. Mama moved to the liquor cabinet, poured amber liquid into crystal glasses. Besides, even if she did say something, who would believe her? A troubled child from a broken home? A girl with behavioral problems and a history of lying. The slam of a drawer. The clink of ice. The sound of glass breaking. One of the men had swept his arm across the coffee table, sending Mama's decorative vase shattering against hardwood. If anyone finds the proof, the first man said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried like poison, burn it. Burn all of it. And bury the girl where nobody will look. Barbara had run back to her room, heart hammering, lungs screaming. She'd pulled the doll from under her pillow, the only friend who never judged, never hurt, never left. And she'd made a decision that would either save her life or end it. She'd started copying files the next day. Barbara. John's voice cut through the memory like a lifeline. Barbara, come back. You're safe. Right here, right now, you're safe. She gasped, her vision clearing to find John's steady eyes locked on hers. His hand was warm on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her that Rusty's was real and the living room was past and she was still breathing. I'm okay, she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. Shaw had moved closer, his backup spreading out to cover the exits. Time's up, gentlemen. Hand her over, or we do this the hard way. The hard way. Tommy's voice rumbled from near the pool table, where he'd positioned himself with a cue that could double as a club. You mean the way where you try to take a child from a bar full of combat veterans and ex-cons who don't take kindly to corrupt cops? Shaw's expression flickered, just for a second, but long enough for Tony to see the calculation behind the badge. They were outnumbered. Out-armed, probably. But Shaw wasn't sure he could take them all without casualties, and casualties meant questions, and questions meant exposure. Stand down, Marcus said, his command voice filling the room. All of you. Shaw, you want the girl? You'll have to explain to your superiors why you kicked in the door of a private establishment. Without a warrant. And we'll have to explain why we defended ourselves against home invasion. He smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. Might get messy. Might get loud. Might get the kind of attention your employers don't want. Shaw's jaw tightened. For a long moment, the The room held its breath. Bikers and corrupt cops locked in a standoff that could go nuclear with one wrong word. Then Shaw's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his face changed. "We're done here. For now." He backed toward the door, his weapon finally lowering. "But understand this. The girl belongs to her mother. The doll belongs to her mother. And if you interfere with a lawful custody situation, I will come back with warrants, with backup, and with the full weight of the law." "The law," Tony said quietly. "That what you're calling it?" Shaw's smile returned, cold and knowing. "Careful, Gatson. You've got priors. Assault. Resisting arrest. One phone call, and I can have your parole revoked. Same goes for Morrison. For Ruiz. For every man in this room who thinks he's some kind of hero." He paused in the doorway. "You've got until morning. Then we come back. With or without your cooperation." He disappeared into the night, his backup following like shadows. Engines started. Gravel crunched. And then silence, heavy and ominous. "They'll be back," Diego said unnecessarily. Marcus locked the ruined door as best he could, wedging a chair under the handle. "We need options. Fast." Tony turned to Barbara, who was still pressed against John's side, the doll clutched in her lap like a talisman. "You said you copied files from a security camera. What exactly did you see?" Barbara's voice was barely audible. "Everything. Mama's meetings with the men in suits. The deliveries at night, boxes that people carried real careful, like they might explode. The times she brought other kids to the house." Her voice cracked. "Kids who looked like me. Scared. Hurt. Kids who came and went and nobody ever asked where they came from or where they went after." "Trafficking," John said, the word falling like a stone. "She's running a trafficking ring." "More than that." Barbara reached into Tony's jacket, still wrapped around her shoulders, and pulled out the folded ledger page. Her small fingers smoothed it flat on the table. "She launders money too. Lots of money. For people who do bad things and need it to look clean. And she owns buildings, warehouses, I think, where she stores stuff she's not supposed to have." Tony studied the ledger, his mind working through possibilities and finding nothing but dead ends. "We can't go to local cops. Can't go to CPS. Can't even be sure about state police if her network reaches that far." "We could run," Mikey suggested from his corner booth. His voice was tight, nervous. "Take the girl, get her across state lines, find someone clean." "And then what?" Marcus cut him off. "We're bikers with records. We show up at an FBI field office with a kidnapped child and a story about corrupt officials? They'll arrest us first and ask questions never. So we do nothing." John's voice was sharp with frustration. "We just hand her over to save our own skins?" "I didn't say that." "Then what the hell are you saying, Marcus?" "I'm saying we need leverage." Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "Someone with reach. Someone who isn't local. Someone who owes me a favor." Tony's phone buzzed again. "Another blocked number. You should have listened. Now we do this the hard way." "We need to move," Diego said, already heading for the windows to check positions. "They're not waiting until morning. They're regrouping. Coming back with more." "The warehouse," Barbara said suddenly. "On Granger Street. The old textile mill. That's where Mama keeps the important stuff, the files she can't risk at home, the money she hasn't washed yet. If you could get there, if you could get proof that's not just on these cards." "It's a trap," Tony said flatly. "She knows we have the cards. She'll know we'll look for more evidence. She'll be waiting." "Maybe," John said slowly. "Or maybe she thinks we're too smart to walk into something that obvious." "You want to bet a child's life on a maybe?" Before John could answer, Barbara spoke again, her voice stronger now, determined. I know the security code. I know where the cameras are. I know where she hides the safe. She looked up at Tony with eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. I can get you in. Absolutely not, Tony and John said in unison. You don't get a vote. Barbara's chin lifted with defiance that would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. It's my life. My evidence. My choice whether to hide or fight. Tony opened his mouth to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He saw himself at that age, watching his mother get beaten by her boyfriend, too small to help, too scared to call for it. He remembered the moment he'd stopped being a victim and started being someone who fought back, consequences be damned. My mother, he said quietly, surprising himself, used to say that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you're afraid and you do the thing anyway. He met Barbara's eyes. You remind me of her. Strong. Stubborn. Too damn brave for your own good. What happened to her? Barbara asked. She got out. Left the boyfriend. Started over. Tony's jaw tightened. Took her 10 years, but she did it. Because she had something worth fighting for. You. Me. He managed a smile that felt like breaking. So yeah, kid. I get it. I get wanting to fight instead of run. But you're 8 years old, and we're talking about going up against people who kill children to protect their secrets. I know. Barbara's voice was steady now, certain. That's why I need you. Because I can't do this alone. But I can't do nothing, either. I can't just wait for her to find me, to take me back, to make me disappear like the others. Outside, engines roared to life in the distance. 3 bikes, maybe 4, their thunder rolling across the Tennessee night like a promise of violence. Tony moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. 3 motorcycles were approaching from the east, riding hard and fast. As they passed under a streetlight, he caught a glimpse of the lead rider's jacket. His blood turned to ice. The patch on the back was a skull with crossed wrenches, the emblem of the Devil's Wrench MC, a rival club from Nashville. But worse than that, riding beside the patch holder was someone Tony recognized, Jake Reaper Morrison. John's younger brother. The brother who'd sworn blood vengeance after John had testified against him in a federal weapons trafficking case 5 years ago. The brother who'd promised, in open court, to kill John Morrison the next time they met. John, Tony said quietly. We got bigger problems. John moved to the window, looked out, and went pale. No, that's not. He's in prison. Federal pen. He's got 8 more years. Apparently he got out early. Tony's hand moved to his Glock again. And he brought friends. The 3 bikes pulled into Rusty's parking lot, engines cutting in unison. Jake Morrison dismounted slowly, deliberately, his movements predatory. He was taller than John, broader, with a kind of prison muscle that came from having nothing to do but lift and fight and plan revenge. He stared at the bar's ruined door, smiled, and cracked his knuckles. Behind him, his 2 companions pulled weapons from their saddlebags, not guns, but bats and chains, the kind of tools used for sending messages written in blood and broken bones. He's here for me, John said, his voice hollow. Evala must have reached out. Must have offered him something, money, information, I don't know, but she brought him here. How would she even know about him? She's got access to everything, Tony. Court records. Prison databases. She probably searched all of us the second Barbara showed up at that roadhouse. John's laugh was bitter. She found my weakness. And she weaponized it. Marcus had joined them at the window, his tactical mind already working angles. Front doors compromised. Back door leads to an alley with 1 exit. We're boxed in. Good, Diego said, his blade finally clearing its sheath. Means they can't run when we hurt them. We've got a child in here, Tony snapped. This isn't the time for macho posturing. The front door exploded inward for the second time that night. Jake Morrison stood in the wreckage, backlit by headlights and holding a baseball bat that had seen recent use. His grin was wide and feral. Hello, brother, he said to John. Been a long time. We got some catching up to do. And behind him, in the parking lot, more engines were approaching. Not bikes this time. Cars. Black SUVs with tinted windows and no plates. Evola Whitson had called in reinforcements. The war was about to begin. The standoff lasted exactly 7 seconds before Marcus made the call that saved their lives. Out the back. Now. Tony grabbed Barbara, jacket and all, while John covered their retreat with his body. Diego went first, kicking open the rear door that led to the alley behind Rusty's. Tommy followed with the shotgun he'd finally retrieved from the office, and Marcus brought up the rear, his bulk blocking the doorway as Jake Morrison's bat whistled through the air where John's head had been a heartbeat earlier. They poured into the alley like water through a broken dam. 5 bikers, 1 terrified child, and evidence that could burn down half of Clarksville's power structure. The night air hit them cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet and violence that had only just begun. Bikes, Tony commanded, but Diego was already ahead of him, sprinting toward where they'd parked their Harleys in the narrow space between Rusty's and the pawnshop next door. Keys turned. Engines roared. And then they were moving, splitting up the way they'd planned 1,000 times but never executed. Tony and Barbara on his Softail, John riding solo, Marcus and Diego paired up, Tommy bringing up the rear like a one-man cavalry. Behind them, Jake Morrison's roar of frustration echoed off brick walls, followed by the screech of SUV tires and the pop-pop-pop of gunfire that was either warning shots or terrible aim. They scattered like buckshot, each bike taking a different route through Clarksville's back roads and forgotten streets. Communication reduced to the burner phones Tony had insisted everyone carry after the last time law enforcement had gotten too interested in the Road King's business. 30 minutes later, they regrouped to the place they'd all agreed on without saying it aloud, the old quarry 15 miles outside town, where teenagers went to drink and bikers went to disappear. Barbara was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, despite the jacket and Tony's body heat and the fact that the night wasn't really that cold. John wrapped her in an emergency blanket from his saddlebag, always prepared, always thinking 2 steps ahead, and held her while she cried the way she probably should have cried hours ago. "We need information," Marcus said, pacing the quarry's edge like a caged animal. "We need to know how deep this goes. Who we can trust. Who's on Evola's payroll." "I've got a contact," Tony said, pulling out his phone. "Guy who used to run with us before he went legit. Works security at the courthouse now. Owes me for keeping quiet about a thing that happened in Knoxville." He made the call. Waited. The voice that answered was whiskey rough and suspicious. "Gatson? Jesus, man, it's almost midnight. This better be. I need a favor, Ray. Background check on Evola Whitson. Everything you can pull, financials, property records, known associates. And I need it yesterday." A long pause. "Evola Whitson, as in the Chamber of Commerce lady? Tony, what the hell did you step in? Something that smells like bodies and corruption. Can you help or not?" Another pause, longer this time. Yeah, I can pull some strings. But Gatson? Be careful. That woman's got friends in places you don't want to piss off." Too late. Tony ended the call and turned to find Mikey Reese standing apart from the group, phone in hand, face pale in the moonlight. Something in Tony's gut twisted. "Mikey," he said casually, "who you texting?" "Nobody." "Too fast. Too defensive. Just checking in with my girl. Making sure she knows I'm okay." "Your girl?" Diego's voice was flat. "The one who dumped you 3 months ago?" Mikey's face flushed. "We got back together. Recently. It's new." Tony's hand moved to his Glock without thinking. Years of combat instinct screamed at him that something was wrong, that the body language was all off, that Mikey Reese was lying through his teeth about something that mattered. "Show me the phone," Tony said quietly. "What? Man, that's..." "Show me the phone." The tension in the quarry cranked up like a guitar string about to snap. Marcus had gone still, reading the situation. Diego's hand had moved to his blade. Even John had looked up from where he was comforting Barbara, his eyes sharp and assessing. Mikey took a step back. "You don't trust me? After everything? After I rode with you guys for 2 years? 2 years doesn't mean shit if you're selling us out." Tony's voice carried the kind of ice that had gotten him through interrogations in Baghdad. "Last chance, Mikey. The phone.
Now.
Mikey's face crumbled. For a second, Tony thought he might actually hand it over, might prove that the paranoia was just combat trauma seeing enemies in shadows. Then Mikey ran. He made it maybe 10 feet before Diego caught him, blade pressing against his throat with a kind of precision that came from 15 years in prison where hesitation meant death. "Don't move," Diego hissed. "Don't even breathe hard." Tony picked up the dropped phone, thumbed it open. No password, stupid. The message history was a goldmine of betrayal, texts to a blocked number, updates on their location, confirmation that they had the package and the evidence. The most recent message, sent 10 minutes ago, at the quarry. Old Limestone Pit off Route 7. Bring cash like you promised. Jesus Christ, Mikey. Tony's voice was hollow. "What did you do?" "She said she'd kill my sister." The words burst out of Mikey like a confession he'd been holding too long. Evola, she found out about Emma. About the drugs, about the charges pending. She said she could make it all go away, could get Emma into rehab instead of prison, but only if I sold out a child. Marcus's voice could have frozen hell. "You sold out an 8-year-old girl to save your junkie sister. Emma's not a junkie, she's sick. She needs help. And you don't know what Evola's like, the things she threatened, the details she knew." Mikey was crying now, ugly desperate sobs. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," John said quietly. He'd stood, leaving Barbara wrapped in the blanket, and now he crossed to where Diego held Mikey pinned. "You chose. And now Barbara pays for it." "I'm sorry," Mikey whispered. "God, I'm so sorry." "How long?" Tony demanded. "How long have you been feeding her information?" Since tonight. Since she texted me after you brought the girl to Rusty's. She knew immediately. Said she had eyes everywhere. Said the only way Emma survives is if I cooperate." "And the cash she promised?" 20 grand. Half up front." Mikey's laugh was broken. "I haven't even seen the money. Just kept doing what she told me, kept hoping." "Hope doesn't feed betrayal," Marcus said. "Greed does. Or fear. In your case, both." Barbara had gotten up, the blanket trailing behind her like a cape. She walked over to where Mikey knelt in the dirt, his face streaked with tears and shame, and looked at him with eyes that had already seen too much of what weakness looked like. "My mama does this," she said, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "Finds what people love. Uses it against them. Makes them think they don't have choices." She tilted her head. "But you did. You could have said no. Could have warned us. Could have been brave." "I'm not brave," Mikey whispered. "I'm not like you. I'm 8. Barbara's words cut like glass. "And I've been braver than you'll ever be." Tony's phone buzzed. A text from Ray. "Got your info. Whitson's dirty as they come. 23 properties under shell companies. Financial ties to 3 judges, 2 cops, 1 CPS director. And Tony? There's a warrant out for your arrest. She's calling this a kidnapping. Every cop in 3 counties is looking for you." "We're out of time," Tony said. "Mikey sold us out, which means Evola knows we're here. We need to move before." Headlights swept across the quarry entrance. Not bikes this time. Black SUVs. 3 of them, moving fast and tactical. "Second exit," Marcus barked. "Through the woods. Go." But they were already too late. The SUVs had positioned to block the only vehicle exit, and armed men were spilling out, too many to fight, too well positioned to evade. "What do we do with him?" Diego asked, his blade still at Mikey's throat. Tony looked at the traitor, at the fear and shame warring on his face, and made a decision that would haunt him later. Let him go. He wants to be with Evola's people so bad. Let them have him. Diego released Mikey, who stumbled forward, hands raised. "Wait, Tony, I can help, I can tell you where." "You already told us everything we needed to know," Tony said coldly. "That loyalty means nothing to you. That family means nothing. That you'll sell your soul for 20 grand and a promise." He turned his back. "Get out of here before I change my mind about the bullet you've earned." Mikey ran toward the SUVs, tripping over rocks, calling out that he was friendly, that he was the one who'd called them. The men in tactical gear grabbed him roughly, zip-tied his hands, and threw him in the back of the lead vehicle like cargo. Tony allowed himself a grim smile. Think they'll pay him? Think they'll kill him, Marcus said. Can't leave witnesses who know they're corrupt. They melted into the woods, bikes abandoned, moving on foot through terrain they'd grown up in. Barbara rode on Tony's back, her small arms wrapped around his neck, the doll stuffed into John's pack alongside the SD cards that were either their salvation or their death warrant. An hour later, they reached the safe house, an old hunting cabin that Marcus had inherited from his grandfather, so far off the grid it didn't appear on any map. No electricity. No running water. Just 4 walls, a wood stove, and enough isolation to buy them time. While the others secured the perimeter, Tony made another call. This time to someone he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, a journalist in Nashville who specialized in exposing corruption and had the spine to publish stories that got people killed. Sarah? It's Tony Gatson. Remember that story you said you'd run if I ever gave you something big enough? He paused. I've got something. Names, dates, video evidence of child trafficking and money laundering. But it comes with a price. What price? Protection. For me, for my crew, and for an 8-year-old witness who knows where everybody's buried. Sarah's voice was sharp with interest. How big are we talking? Judges. Cops. CPS workers. Maybe bigger. Tony looked at where Barbara sat by the wood stove, John's jacket wrapped around her, her eyes reflecting firelight and determination. Big enough that half the people you call for comment will try to kill you for asking questions. Then I guess, Sarah said slowly, we better make sure we ask really good questions. Send me what you have. I'll start making calls. Tony ended the connection and sank onto a wooden chair that creaked under his weight. They'd bought themselves maybe 12 hours. Maybe less if Evela's people were as good as he suspected. John was looking through Barbara's backpack, inventorying what she'd managed to grab before running. He pulled out a small photo album, the kind with plastic sleeves, and started flipping through it. He froze on the 3rd page. Tony, look at this. The Polaroid was old, faded, maybe 6 or 7 years. It showed a toddler, Barbara, unmistakably, with the same wide eyes and cornrow beads, being held by a woman who might have been Evela. But standing beside them, hand possessively on the woman's shoulder, was a man Tony recognized. Not from Clarksville. From prison. From the federal pen where he'd served 18 months on weapons charges. The man's name was Marcus Webb. Different Marcus. Prison Marcus. The same Marcus Webb who'd been released 8 months ago and immediately disappeared into whatever holes men like him crawled into. The same Marcus Webb who'd been making phone calls to someone when they'd regrouped at the quarry. To someone whose number Tony now realized he'd never actually checked. Oh God, John whispered. Marcus. Our Marcus. He's been. Behind them, the cabin door opened. Marcus Johnson stood silhouetted in the doorframe, his phone in one hand and something that looked like regret on his face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. But she's got my daughter. My real daughter. The one I haven't seen in 15 years because her mother took her and disappeared. His voice cracked. She's got Keisha. And the price for her life is Barbara. He raised his other hand. In it was a gun. And outside, engines approached through the woods. SUVs that had been guided to their location by the GPS tracker Marcus had activated the moment they'd reached the cabin. They'd never been safe. Not for a single second. Time stopped. Marcus's gun hung in the air between them like a question nobody wanted to answer. His finger rested on the trigger guard, not ready to fire, not yet, but close enough that Tony's combat instinct screamed at him to move, to draw, to put Marcus down before this turned into the bloodbath it was already becoming. Don't, John said quietly, his hands rising slowly. Marcus, whatever she told you, whatever she promised, it's a lie. You know that. Deep down, you know. I know she sent me a video. Marcus's voice was hollow, scraped raw. Of Keisha. My baby girl. 15 years old now, looks just like her mother. She's in a room with concrete walls and a single light bulb. His hand shook. And Evela's voice in the background saying she's got 24 hours before something bad happens. Something permanent. So you sell out Barbara? Tony's hand inched toward his Glock. Trade one child for another? It's my daughter. And she's someone's daughter too. Tony gestured at Barbara, who'd frozen by the wood stove, her eyes wide but her jaw set with a kind of determination that broke hearts. You think Evala lets either of them live? You think she keeps her word? Marcus's face crumpled. I don't know what else to do. You choose, John said. Right now. You choose between the man who raised you and the man who abandoned his code for a ghost. His voice gentled. Marcus, I know you. I've ridden with you through hell and back. This isn't you. 4-3 heartbeats, the world balanced on a knife's edge. Then Marcus lowered the gun. I can't, he whispered. God help me, I can't do this. The cabin door exploded inward before anyone could respond. Not with a battering ram or kicked hinges, with controlled demolition charges that turned solid wood into shrapnel and concussive force. Tony's ears rang, his vision blurred, and by the time he'd processed what was happening, tactical teams were already pouring through the smoke. 6 men. Full body armor. Military-grade weapons. Moving with a kind of precision that screamed special forces training or private military contractors. Not cops playing dress-up. Real operators. The first burst of gunfire tore through the cabin's ancient wood like tissue paper. Tony Dove left, pulling Barbara down with him, his body covering hers as splinters rained like deadly confetti. John went right, overturning a table for cover. Marcus, stood frozen for one fatal second before Diego tackled him to the floor. Suppressing fire, someone shouted from outside. More gunfire. More smoke. The wood stove shattered, spilling red-hot coals across the floor. Tommy appeared from the back room where he'd been standing watch, the shotgun roaring in his massive hands. One of the tactical team went down hard, his body armor taking the buckshot but the force throwing him back through the doorway. We're pinned. Diego shouted, his blade useless against assault rifles. Tony, we need an exit. But there was no exit. The cabin had one door, compromised. 2 windows, covered by shooters. And a back room that led to nothing but wooden walls and the promise of being trapped like rats. Barbara squirmed under Tony's protective weight. Let me up. Stay down. There's a root cellar. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Behind the stove. I saw it when we came in. It's old but... Another burst of gunfire cut her off. This time, closer. One of the tactical team had made it inside, sweeping the room with practiced efficiency. John rose from behind the overturned table and fired 3 shots, controlled, precise, center mass. The man's body armor took 2, but the third caught him in the throat where the vest didn't cover. He went down choking, blood spraying. Jesus, John gasped. He'd been sober 7 years. 7 years of nonviolence, of healing, of trying to be something other than the man who'd killed in Afghanistan. Now blood was on his hands again, and the look on his face said something inside him had just broken. Root cellar. Tony shouted. Everyone move. They scrambled toward the ruined wood stove. Sure enough, beneath where it had stood was a trapdoor, old, half-rotted, but functional. Diego wrenched it open to reveal darkness and the smell of earth. Go. Marcus commanded, his gun finally up and firing toward the door, laying down cover. I'll hold them. Like hell, Tommy rumbled. He'd positioned himself near the entrance, the shotgun reloaded, his massive frame blocking the doorway like Thermopylae-given flesh. You get the girl out. I'll make sure they remember who they fucked with. Tommy, no. Wasn't asking permission, Tony. Tommy's grin was wild, touched with something that looked like relief. Been waiting my whole life to do something that matters. Turns out today's the day. More gunfire. More smoke. Someone threw a flashbang that turned the world white and silent. When Tony's vision cleared, Tommy was still standing, bleeding from a dozen wounds but standing, his shotgun empty but his fists swinging. He caught one of the tactical team with a haymaker that shattered the man's jaw, then lifted him bodily and threw him into his companions. Tommy! Diego screamed, trying to go back, but John grabbed him and bodily hauled him toward the trapdoor. Barbara was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched the big man who'd wrapped her feet in bandages fight like something mythical and doomed. Tommy looked back at them one last time. His eyes found Barbara's, and he smiled, genuine warm, the smile of a man who'd found peace in the last place he expected. "You run, little darlin'," he said. "You run and you tell everyone what they did. You tell them Tommy O'Brien died so the truth could live." Then he turned back to the doorway and charged. The gunfire that followed was deafening, final, and when it stopped, Tommy O'Brien was gone. They dropped into the root cellar, Tony, John, Diego, Marcus, and Barbara, landing hard on packed earth that smelled of rot and generations. Behind them, the trapdoor slammed shut, and John wedged it with a timber that might buy them 60 seconds. The cellar extended into a tunnel, probably a bootlegger's escape route from Prohibition, that ran maybe 50 yards before terminating in a rusted grate. Diego kicked it open, and they spilled out into dawn light that felt obscene after the darkness. They were a quarter-mile from the cabin, hidden in a gully thick with kudzu and forgotten things. Behind them, the sound of pursuit. Shouting. Orders being barked and clipped, professional tones. "Move," Tony commanded, but Barbara had stopped. "I can't," she whispered, staring back at the cabin where smoke was beginning to rise. "He died for me. Tommy died because of me." John knelt in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, his face streaked with soot and tears. "He died because evil exists and good men stand against it. That's not on you, sweetheart. That's on them." "But." "No buts. You honor him by surviving. By making sure his sacrifice meant something." John's voice cracked. "Can you do that? Can you be brave enough to live?" Barbara nodded, small and broken and somehow still standing. They ran. Through woods that tore at their clothes and cut their skin. Through creeks that numbed their feet. Through terrain that Diego knew from a misspent youth and Marcus knew from hunting trips before his daughter disappeared and the world went wrong. 2 hours later, they collapsed in an abandoned grain silo 15 miles from where Tommy O'Brien had made his last stand. The sirens had started an hour ago, police, fire, probably federal now that bodies were involved. Diego's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, 3 dead. 2 wounded. 1 in custody. You can't run forever. Tony checked the news on his phone. The story was already breaking. Shootout at hunting cabin leaves multiple dead. Authorities investigating possible biker gang violence. No mention of Evala Whitson. No mention of trafficking or corruption. Just a simple narrative. Criminals killing criminals. Nothing to see here, move along. "They're controlling the story," Marcus said, his voice dead. "Making us the bad guys." "We are the bad guys," Diego muttered. "Look at us. Outlaws hiding in a silo with stolen evidence and a kidnapped kid." "She's not kidnapped, she's rescued," John snapped. "Law doesn't care about the difference." Barbara had curled up against Tony's side, the doll clutched in her arms, her breathing shallow with exhaustion and shock. She was asleep within minutes, the sleep of children who've learned that consciousness hurts more than dreams. Tony pulled out the SD cards, holding them up to the light filtering through gaps in the silo's walls. "We need to get these to Sarah, the journalist. She's our only play now." "How?" Marcus asked. "They've got our faces. Our bikes. Probably our DNA from the cabin. Every cop in Tennessee's looking for us. Then we don't use roads." Diego's eyes had gone distant, calculating. "I know a guy. Runs cargo boats on the Cumberland River. Owes me for a thing in Nashville. He can get us to Kentucky, maybe Ohio. Far enough from Evala's reach to regroup." It was a plan. Barely. The kind of desperate gambit that worked in movies and failed in real life, leaving bodies in its wake. But it was all they had. As they prepared to move again, John found something caught in the silo's ventilation grate, a scrap of paper, burned around the edges, soaked from last night's rain but still partially legible. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, controlled. "Find the doll. Recover the evidence. Eliminate all witnesses. No exceptions. E.W." Below that, in different ink, cabin location confirmed. Team deployed. "She knew," Tony said, staring at the note. "Even before Marcus called it in. She knew we'd run here. She's been 3 steps ahead the whole time." "How?" Diego demanded. "How the hell is she?" "Because she's not just connected," John said quietly. "She's the connection. The hub. Everything flows through her, money, information, power." He looked at Barbara, still sleeping, still trusting them despite every reason not to. We're not fighting a criminal. We're fighting a system. And systems don't die easy. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at it and went pale. What? Tony demanded. Video message. From Evola. Marcus's hands shook as he hit play. The screen showed a teenage girl, Keisha, unmistakably Marcus's daughter, with his eyes and his cheekbones. She was tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. No visible injuries yet. But the promise of them hung in the air like a raised fist. Evola's voice, off camera, cultured and cold. Marcus Johnson. You had one job. Instead, you grew a conscience. A pause. Your daughter pays for your weakness. 24 hours. Then we start with fingers. The video ended. Marcus looked at Tony with eyes that had already accepted the worst. I have to go back. Have to turn myself in. Maybe if I give them me, they'll kill you both, Diego said flatly. You know it. I know it. Even Keisha knows it. Then what do I do? Marcus's voice broke. Let her die. Let them torture my baby girl because I chose wrong. Barbara had woken up, watching them with those two old eyes. Your daughter, she said quietly, she looks brave. Like you. Like Tommy was. What are you saying? I'm saying. Barbara's small hand reached for the doll. Maybe brave people choose each other. Maybe that's how we win. By being braver than they are cruel. In the distance, engines approached. Not police this time. Black SUVs. Evola's people, hunting. The ambush at the cabin had been just the opening move. The real war was about to begin. The Polaroid led them to Granger Street. Not the address directly, nothing that clean, but the background details Tony had spotted after staring at the faded photo for 2 hours while Barbara slept and Diego kept watch. A chain-link fence with a specific diamond pattern. A water tower in the distance with Clarksville Municipal barely visible. And most damning, a reflection in the window behind toddler Barbara and the man holding her, the partial logo of Grang, and what looked like textile beneath it. 3 buildings on Granger Street fit the profile. Only one was still operational. Granger Industrial Storage. A sprawling warehouse complex on the east side of town where the railroad tracks ran parallel to abandoned factories and the kind of economic decay that made perfect camouflage for illegal operations. During the day, legitimate businesses used the front units for inventory overflow and equipment storage. At night, the place went dark except for security lights that probably saw more than they reported. It's too obvious, John said, studying the warehouse through binoculars from their position on the roof of an abandoned textile mill across the street. Dawn had broken an hour ago, painting everything in shades of rust and regret. She has to know we'll come here. Maybe, Tony agreed. Or maybe she thinks we're too smart to walk into something obvious. Either way, we're out of options. Sarah the journalist needs hard evidence, more than SD cards that defense attorneys can claim are doctored. We need paper trails. Financial records. Something that can't be explained away. Marcus sat against a ventilation unit, his phone in his hands, playing and replaying the video of his daughter every few minutes like a man picking at a wound. I should go in alone, he said quietly. Trade myself for. No. Diego's voice was flat. We don't negotiate with terrorists, and that's what Evola is. A terrorist in pearls and a business suit. My daughter is alive because Evola needs leverage. The second you walk in there, she kills you both and dumps the bodies where nobody will ask questions. Diego's scarred face was stone. We save Keisha by taking Evola down. Not before. Barbara had been quiet through the planning, sitting with her back against the roof's low wall, the doll in her lap. She'd barely spoken since Tommy's death, and the silence around her had weight, the kind that came from a child processing trauma too big for words. Now she stood, brushed off her pants, and walked to where they were studying the warehouse. I can get in, she said. Absolutely not, Tony and John said simultaneously. I've been in before. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. Mama used to bring me when I was little. Before I got old enough to understand what I was seeing. She'd tell people I was sleeping in the office while she worked late. Barbara's jaw tightened. But I wasn't sleeping. I was watching. Learning. I know the layout. I know where the cameras are. I know where the safe is hidden. Barbara, sweetheart, John started. I'm not asking permission. Her eyes held that ancient quality again, You're 8 years old. I'm 8 years old and I've survived things that would break most adults. She held up the doll. I documented evidence of a criminal conspiracy. I ran 15 miles barefoot to escape. I watched a good man die to protect me. Her voice cracked but held. Don't tell me I'm too young to be brave when that's all I've been my whole life. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truth nobody wanted to acknowledge. If she goes, Marcus said finally, I go. Someone needs to cover her. Someone expendable. You're not expendable, Tony said. I led them to the cabin. I almost sold her out. I owe a debt that can't be paid except in blood or redemption. Marcus stood, checked his weapon. So I'm paying it. They spent an hour planning, the kind of tactical breakdown Tony remembered from his army days, when missions had clear objectives and moral clarity. This had neither, but they worked with what they had: 2 entrances, 3 exits, camera blind spots that Barbara identified, and a shift change at 8 a.m. when security would be distracted. The plan was simple because simple plans failed less spectacularly. Barbara and Marcus would enter through the loading dock using a stolen security badge Diego had acquired from a contact nobody asked about. They'd locate the safe, photograph the contents, and extract. Tony and John would provide overwatch from across the street, ready to create a distraction if things went sideways. Diego would hotwire a delivery van for their escape. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only one they had. At 7:55 a.m., Barbara and Marcus approached the warehouse. She looked impossibly small next to his bulk, a child holding hands with a man who'd already failed her once and was determined not to fail again. The security guard barely glanced at the badge before waving them through. Just another contractor and his kid, nothing unusual. They were inside. Tony watched through the binoculars, his finger resting on the radio trigger, ready to call an abort if anything looked wrong. Beside him, John was muttering what might have been prayers or might have been calculations. Hard to tell with him sometimes. Movement, John said. Southwest corner. 3 men. Not security uniforms. Tony swung the binoculars. 3 men in tactical gear, the same kind that had hit the cabin. They were positioned near what looked like a maintenance entrance, weapons visible, radio headsets active. They know we're here, Tony breathed. Jesus, they know. Do we abort? Tony's thumb hovered over the radio button. One word and Marcus would pull Barbara out, they'd run, and whatever evidence was in that warehouse would stay buried. But they'd also be back to square one, hunted desperate, and no closer to stopping Evola. We hold, he decided. But we shorten the timeline. 5 minutes. They get in, photograph what they can, and we extract. Inside the warehouse, Barbara led Marcus through a maze of shipping crates and industrial equipment with the confidence of someone who'd walked this path before. Her small hand pointed out cameras, indicated guard patterns, showed him the path of least resistance toward the administrative offices in the back. The office was locked, but Marcus had come prepared with a bump key that made short work of the deadbolt. Inside, a desk, filing cabinets, and a portrait of Evola Whitson smiling like someone's favorite aunt. Safe's behind the painting, Barbara whispered. Combination is her birthday, March 17, 1978. The safe opened with a soft click that sounded like thunder in the quiet office. Inside was a treasure trove of damnation. Ledgers detailing payments to dozens of public officials. Photographs, God the photographs, of children in situations that made Marcus want to burn the whole building down with everyone in it. Property deeds for 16 warehouses and storage facilities across 3 states. Bank account numbers in the Caymans. And a master list labeled network participants with names that read like a who's who of Tennessee's power structure. Marcus's hands shook as he photographed everything with his phone, the camera shutter sound seeming impossibly loud. Beside him, Barbara had gone pale, staring at one particular photograph, a woman Marcus didn't recognize, eyes closed, positioned in a way that screamed crime scene. That's Mrs. Rodriguez, Barbara whispered. She worked at my school. She was nice to me. Asked me questions about home. Her voice went flat. She disappeared 3 months ago. Police said she ran away with her boyfriend. She didn't run away, Marcus said gently. No. Mama made her disappear because she was asking questions. Barbara's small hand touched the photograph. She was trying to help me. A voice crackled over Marcus's radio. Tony, urgent, you've got incoming. 2 men, main corridor, heading your way. 30 seconds. Copy, Marcus whispered. He swept the remaining documents into a bag, closed the safe, repositioned the painting. Barbara, we need to move. But Barbara had frozen, her eyes locked on something outside the office window, a figure crossing the warehouse floor, flanked by the 3 tactical guys Tony had spotted earlier. Evelyn Whitson. In the flesh, finally. Perfectly coiffed hair, designer pantsuit, and an expression of cold fury that could have frozen fire. She's here, Barbara breathed. She's actually here. Marcus pulled Barbara down below the window line. Then we stay quiet and we stay hidden until she leaves. She won't leave. She knows we're here. That's why she came. Barbara's voice carried a terrible certainty. She's been waiting for us to make this move. Outside the office, footsteps approached. Multiple sets. Confident, unhurried. Evelyn's voice, cultured and cold. I know you're in there, Marcus Johnson. I know my daughter is with you. And I know you've seen things you shouldn't have seen. Marcus's hand moved to his weapon, but Barbara grabbed his wrist and shook her head urgently. Instead, she pointed to a ventilation duct near the ceiling, barely big enough for her small frame, impossible for Marcus. She mouthed, distraction. Before Marcus could stop her, Barbara grabbed a stapler from the desk and threw it through the office window on the opposite side, away from the door, toward the warehouse's main floor. The glass shattered with a crash that echoed like gunfire. There! Someone shouted. Footsteps thundered away from the office, toward the sound. Barbara was already climbing onto the desk, pulling herself into the ventilation duct with a kind of desperate agility that came from survival instinct. Follow the corridor to the loading dock, she whispered to Marcus. I'll meet you there. Barbara. Go. She disappeared into the duct, the doll tucked under her arm, leaving Marcus alone with a bag full of evidence and the sound of men returning to the office. He went out the window, the one Barbara had broken, dropping 10 feet to the warehouse floor and rolling to absorb the impact. His ankle screamed protest but held. Behind him, the office door crashed open and voices shouted coordinates and weapons cleared leather. Tony's voice in his ear, Marcus, status? Compromised. Barbara's in the vents. Heading to loading dock for extraction. Copy. We're moving to intercept. Marcus ran, weaving between crates and equipment, the bag bouncing against his back. Gunfire erupted behind him, not aimed to kill, aimed to herd, to funnel him toward a predetermined position. He realized too late that he was being driven into a trap. The loading dock opened before him, and standing there in the morning light were 5 men in Clarksville PD uniforms. Real cops or evil as people in costume. At this point, the distinction didn't matter. Leading them was Detective Shaw, the same corrupt cop from Rusty's, his weapon drawn and his smile triumphant. End of the line, Marcus, Shaw said. Drop the bag. Put your hands up. Do it slow and nobody has to get hurt. Behind Marcus, Evelyn emerged from the warehouse interior, flanked by her tactical team. In front of him, corrupt cops. Above him, Barbara somewhere in the ventilation system. And across the street, Tony and John watching through binoculars, calculating odds that didn't favor anyone. The bag of evidence felt impossibly heavy. Then, over the sound of weapons being aimed and hard men positioning for violence, came a new sound, sirens. Multiple vehicles. Growing closer. Police lights swept the warehouse property, but not the Clarksville PD cruisers Marcus had expected. These were unmarked sedans with federal plates. FBI. Shaw's face went from triumphant to confused to terrified in the space of 3 seconds. Evelyn's mask finally cracked, her perfect composure slipping to reveal something feral and desperate beneath. And in the ventilation duct above them all, Barbara Whitson held her breath and clutched her doll and prayed that the good guys arriving were actually good. Because in Clarksville, Tennessee, that was never a safe bet. The FBI sedan screeched to a halt in formation, tactical, practiced, the kind of choreography that spoke of federal training and institutional resources. 7 agents spilled out, weapons drawn, badges displayed, shouting commands that cut through the morning air like razors. FBI. Everyone on the ground. Hands where we can see them. 4-3 heartbeats. Nobody moved. The tableau held, corrupt cops, Evila's tactical team, Marcus with his bag of evidence, and somewhere above them all, Barbara holding her breath in a ventilation duct that suddenly felt like a coffin. Then Shaw made a choice that would haunt his final moments. He raised his weapon toward the federal agents. The gunfire was immediate, clinical, final. Shaw went down hard, 3-round center mass, his corrupt cop uniform soaking through with blood that looked black against the pavement. 2 of his officers dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The other 3 tried to run and were tackled within seconds by agents who moved like wolves on wounded prey. Evila Whitson turned and walked calmly back into the warehouse, her tactical team moving to cover her retreat. Federal agents pursued, shouting commands that were met with a distinctive crack of return fire from inside. Marcus used the chaos to move, not running, but backing toward cover, the evidence bag clutched against his chest like it contained salvation instead of damnation. He keyed his radio. "Tony, I need extraction. Now." On it came Tony's terse response. "Diego's bringing the van around. 60 seconds. But 60 seconds was an eternity when bullets were flying and Barbara was still somewhere in the walls. Above the carnage, Barbara crawled through the ventilation system, her small body navigating turns and drops that would have trapped an adult. The doll was wedged under her arm, its button eyes staring at nothing, its fabric body pressed against her racing heart. She could hear everything, the gunfire, the shouting, the sound of men dying for secrets she'd helped expose. Mrs. Rodriguez died for asking questions, she thought. Tommy died protecting me. How many more people have to die because Mama chose money over mercy? The duct opened onto a grate overlooking the warehouse's main floor. Barbara peered through, searching for a path down, and froze. Directly below her, Evila stood in what looked like a makeshift command center, computer monitors, radio equipment, and a wall covered in photographs. Not the kind of photos from the safe. These were surveillance images. Targets. Barbara recognized faces: Tony, John, Marcus, Diego. Each photo marked with dates, locations, vulnerabilities. Her mother had been hunting them with the same cold efficiency most people reserved for business competitors. But it was the other wall that made Barbara's breath catch in her throat. Children. Dozens of them. Some faces Barbara recognized from school, from the grocery store, from the brief moments when Evila would parade her around town like a trophy of maternal success. Others were strangers, but the fear in their eyes was universal, timeless, the look of prey that knows the predator is close. And beneath each photo, dates, prices, destinations. A ledger of human trafficking written in neat handwriting that Barbara recognized from birthday cards and permission slips and the 1,000 small ways Evila had pretended to be a mother. "Find the girl," Evila commanded into a radio, her cultured voice stripped of pretense now, showing the steel beneath the silk. "I don't care what it takes. Find her and bring her to me. Alive preferably, but I'll settle for ensuring she can't testify." Barbara's hands shook on the grate. That voice, the same voice that had sung lullabies when she was small, before everything went wrong, was now calmly ordering her death. The grate gave way. Barbara fell 10 feet, landing hard on a stack of shipping pallets that probably saved her life but knocked the wind from her lungs. The doll tumbled from her grip, rolling to a stop at Evila's feet. For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with physical space. "Barbara." Evila's face was unreadable. "My sweet girl. You've caused so much trouble." Barbara gasped for air, her ribs screaming, her vision blurring. "You're not my mama," she wheezed. "Mama's protect. Mama's love. You're just a monster wearing her face." Something flickered in Evila's eyes, hurt, maybe, or anger, or the ghost of whatever humanity she possessed before greed and power had consumed it. "I gave you everything. Food, shelter, a home. Do you know what I sacrificed to? You sold me." Barbara's voice cracked, raw with 8 years of silence finally breaking. "You sold other kids. You let men hurt us and you called it business." She was crying now, ugly desperate sobs. "I wanted you to love me. I tried so hard to be good, to be perfect, to be whatever you needed, so you just love me like mamas are supposed to." Evila's hand moved to her jacket, emerging with a small pistol that looked obscene in her manicured grip. "I did love you. In my way. But you've become a liability, sweetheart. And in business, you cut your losses before they sink the entire operation. The gun rose. Barbara closed her eyes. The shot never came. Marcus tackled Evola from the side. He'd circled back when Barbara fell, abandoning extraction for protection, and the gun discharged into the ceiling, concrete dust raining down like snow. They hit the ground hard, Evola fighting with the desperate strength of someone who'd never done physical violence herself, but understood survival at a cellular level. Barbara, run. Marcus roared, his hands trying to control the weapon as Evola clawed at his face with nails that drew blood. But Barbara didn't run. She grabbed the doll, her evidence, her testimony, her proof, and looked for anything that could help. Her eyes landed on the computer monitors, still displaying files, still connected to whatever server held Evola's empire together. Without thinking, Barbara pulled one of the SD cards from the doll and plugged it into the computer. Her small fingers flew over the keyboard. She'd watched Evola work countless times, had memorized passwords by accident or instinct, and suddenly files were uploading to the server, propagating across the network, copying themselves to every connected terminal. Evidence. Everywhere. Impossible to delete or contain. What did you do? Evola shrieked, seeing the upload bar climbing toward 100%. She threw Marcus off with adrenaline-fueled strength and lunged for the computer. Federal agents burst into the command center before she made it 3 steps. They had her on the ground in seconds, hands zip-tied, Miranda rights being recited over her screaming protests about lawyers and immunity deals and people who would make this all go away. But the files were already spreading. Already being backed up to FBI servers, cloud storage, journalist inboxes that Sarah had helped Barbara set up during a phone call Tony didn't know about. The truth was loose. And truth, Barbara was learning, was harder to kill than people. 6 hours later, they regrouped in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Nashville, far enough from Clarksville to breathe, close enough to federal protection to hope. The FBI had taken statements, secured the evidence, and arrested 17 people including Evola Whitson, Detective Shaw before he died, and 3 CPS workers whose names appeared in the ledgers. But the real reckoning was still coming. Tony sat on the motel bed, studying the copies of documents they'd photographed before surrendering the originals to federal custody. His face was grim. It goes higher than Evola. Look at these payment schedules. She's middle management at best. Someone above her is pulling strings, processing payments, coordinating across state lines. Who? Before Tony could answer, the motel door burst open. Not FBI this time. Diego, looking wild-eyed and triumphant, dragging someone by the collar. Mikey Reese. The traitor looked worse for wear, black eye, split lip, clothes torn. But he was alive, which was more than he deserved. Found him trying to buy a bus ticket to Mexico, Diego said, throwing Mikey into a chair. Figured you'd want a conversation before I let the feds have him. I can explain, Mikey started. Shut up, Marcus said quietly. His daughter's video had stopped updating an hour ago, either good news or the worst news possible. His patience for betrayal had run out. You sold us out. Tommy's dead because of you. Give me one reason not to put a bullet in you and call it justice. Because I was following orders. Mikey's voice broke. Not Evola's orders. Bigger. Someone who makes Evola look like a shoplifter. He swallowed hard. State Senator Richard Hale. He's the one who approached me. Said he knew about Emma, about her problems. Said he could help, but only if I kept him informed about anything that might threaten business interests in the region. The name hung in the air like a curse. Senator Hale. War hero. Family values champion. The man who'd built his entire political career on protecting children and strengthening communities. Jesus, John breathed. He's running for governor. The primaries in 2 months. He's also, Mikey continued, his voice shaking, the silent partner in 16 LLCs that own properties across Tennessee. Properties that show up in Evola's ledgers. He's been washing money through real estate for years. Evola's operation? It's his operation. She just runs the day-to-day. Tony pulled out his phone, searching news sites. There it was, Senator Hale giving a press conference, expressing shock and disgust at the Clarksville trafficking ring, promising swift justice and stronger laws to protect Tennessee's children. The man was already controlling the narrative, positioning himself as the solution to a problem he'd created. We give this to the FBI, John said immediately. Let them handle it. We're bikers, not investigators. The FBI answers to politicians, Tony countered. You think federal agents are going to move against a sitting U.S. senator without ironclad proof? We've got ledgers and financial records, but his lawyers will bury us in paperwork and technicalities while evidence disappears. So what? Marcus demanded. We go full vigilante? Kill him ourselves? No. Barbara's small voice cut through the argument. She'd been so quiet they'd almost forgotten she was there, curled up on the other bed with her doll. We make him confess. Like Mama did. Like they all do when they think they're safe. She held up a small device, a digital recorder Tony recognized from his army days. We record everything. Then we give it to everyone. Every newspaper. Every TV station. Every person in Tennessee who thinks Senator Hale is a hero. How do we get close enough to make him talk? Diego asked. Barbara's smile was small, sad, and impossibly brave. I'm a victim. A survivor. He'll want to meet me. For the photo opportunity. To show he cares. She looked at Tony. That's when we trap him. When he thinks he's winning. Tony studied the 8-year-old girl who'd survived hell and was now planning to drag her demons into the light. Part of him wanted to protect her, to hide her away until the world was safe. But the world would never be safe. Not without people brave enough to fight back. Okay, he said. Let's bring down a senator. Barbara pulled out the ledger photos, spreading them on the bed. Most faces she recognized from the warehouse. But one made her freeze. Judge Malcolm Hayes. The kind-faced man who'd presided over her school's career day. Who'd knelt down to her level and told her she could be anything she wanted. Who'd given her a bookmark with an inspirational quote about justice. His photo was stapled to a payment record. $50,000. Monthly. For case management and evidence disposal. The bookmark was still in Barbara's backpack. She pulled it out, read the quote, "Justice delayed is justice denied." She looked at Tony with eyes that had finally stopped crying because tears didn't fix things. Only truth did. They're all rotten, she whispered. Every adult I trusted. Every person who was supposed to protect kids. They're all just monsters pretending. Tony knelt in front of her, his scarred hands gentle on her shoulders. Not all of them. Tommy wasn't. The FBI agents who arrested your mother weren't. The journalist helping us isn't. He paused. Sometimes the system breaks. Sometimes institutions rot from the inside. But that doesn't mean the fight isn't worth it. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you're not broken yet. Because you still believe things should be better. And that, kiddo. Tony's voice cracked. That's the most powerful weapon you've got. Outside, a car engine idled. Not FBI this time. A black town car with Senate plates. Senator Richard Hale had come to meet his newest problem personally. And he had no idea the problem had teeth. Senator Richard Hale stepped out of the town car like he was descending from Mount Olympus to bless the mortals. 6'2", silver hair perfect despite the humidity, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His smile was practiced, warm, the kind that had won elections and charmed donors and hidden a multitude of sins. Behind him came 2 aides, young, ambitious, the kind who'd sell their souls for a line on a resume, and a private security detail that moved with military precision. Tony watched from the motel window, his hand resting on his Glock. He's here. Ballsy, Diego muttered. Coming himself instead of sending lawyers. He doesn't think we're a threat, John said quietly. He thinks we're bikers with a traumatized kid and no proof that'll hold up in court. He's here to assess the damage and contain it. Then let's show him he miscalculated, Marcus said, checking the recording equipment they'd set up. 3 digital recorders, 2 phones set to capture video, and a laptop streaming live to Sarah's secure server in Nashville. Barbara sat on the bed, wearing clean clothes for the first time in days, jeans and a purple t-shirt that John had bought from a Walmart, along with new shoes that actually fit. Her hair had been washed and rebraided by a nurse at the FBI field office, and she looked almost like a normal 8-year-old. Almost. The ancient quality in her eyes gave the lie to any pretense of innocence. You don't have to do this, Tony said for the 10th time. We can find another way. We can. No, we can't. Barbara's voice was steady. You said it yourself. His lawyers will bury the evidence. His friends will make it disappear. The only thing that breaks through is a victim telling her story. She managed a smile that broke Tony's heart. I'm good at telling stories. Mama always said I had an imagination. A knock on the door. Polite, measured, the kind of knock that came from people who didn't expect resistance. Tony opened it to find Senator Hale's smile at full wattage. Mr. Gatson. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I understand you've been through quite an ordeal. That's one word for it, Tony said, not moving from the doorway. May I come in? I'd like to speak with young Barbara. Offer whatever support the state can provide. This is a tragedy, and we need to ensure that your name stays clean. Diego's voice cut like a blade from inside the room. That nobody connects the dots between you and Evelyn Whitson's operation? The senator's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. I don't know what you think you know, but I assure you. Cut the shit, Hale. Marcus had moved into view, his bulk blocking the senator's sightline to Barbara. We've got your financials. Your property holdings. Payment records linking you to 16 LLCs that funnel money from trafficking operations. You're not here to help. You're here to figure out how to bury us. 4-3 heartbeats, the mask held. Then Senator Hale's smile transformed into something sharp and predatory. Gentlemen, he said quietly, his cultured voice dropping all pretense of warmth, do you have any idea who you're threatening? I have the governor on speed dial. I have federal judges who owe me favors. I have enough dirt on enough people to bring down this entire state if I choose. He leaned closer. Whatever you think you have, it won't be enough. And whatever protection you think the FBI is offering will evaporate the moment my lawyers start making calls. Then I guess, Barbara said, stepping into view, you better hear what I'm going to tell everyone. The senator's eyes locked on her. For a moment, just a moment, Tony saw something that might have been fear cross that perfect face. Hello, sweetheart, Hale said, his mask sliding back into place like it had never left. You must be Barbara. I'm so sorry for what you've been through. But you need to understand that sometimes, troubled children say things that aren't quite. My name is Barbara Whitson, she interrupted, her voice clear and strong. I'm 8 years old. And for the last 3 years, my mother Evelyn Whitson sold me to men who paid money to hurt children. She didn't blink, didn't waver. Some of those men had their pictures in your office, Senator. I saw them when Mama brought me to that fundraiser last year. The one where you gave a speech about protecting families. Hale's jaw tightened. That's a very serious accusation. One that could have legal consequences for you and your guardians here. Then sue me, Barbara said simply. Take me to court. Put me on the stand. Let me tell a jury everything I know about your properties, your payments, your business partners. Her small hand reached for the doll. Let me show them the videos. Videos can be faked. Not these ones. Barbara's smile was terrible to see on an 8-year-old's face. They're time-stamped, geotagged, cross-referenced with phone records and financial transactions. And as of 2 hours ago, they're backed up on 17 different servers across 3 states. She tilted her head. You can kill me, Senator. You can kill everyone in this room. But you can't kill truth once it's set loose. The senator's hand moved toward his jacket, not going for a weapon, just a reflexive gesture that his security detail read wrong. They surged forward, hands moving to holsters, professional instincts overriding political calculation. Which was exactly the moment Sarah's cameraman, positioned in the room next door with a telephoto lens, captured everything. The aggressive stance. The security detail's weapons clearing leather. And most damning, Senator Hale's face twisted with rage and fear, all pretense of benevolence stripped away. The photo would be on the front page of every major newspaper in Tennessee by morning. You're making a mistake, Hale said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. All of you. You think this is over? You think exposing me means anything? I'm one piece of a machine that's bigger than you can imagine. He looked at Barbara with something that might have been pity. They'll destroy you, little girl. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because that's what happens to people who threaten the order of things. Maybe, Barbara said. But at least I'll die knowing I tried to stop you. Can you say the same about all the kids you helped disappear? The senator turned and walked away, his entourage scrambling to follow. As the town car pulled out of the motel parking lot, Tony saw Hale on his phone, gesturing angrily, already starting the process of damage control that would fail spectacularly over the next 72 hours. Phase 1 complete, Marcus said, rewinding the recordings to confirm they'd captured everything. Now comes the hard part. Sarah's press conference was scheduled for 6 p.m., prime time news, maximum impact. They'd chosen a courthouse in Nashville, far enough from Clarksville to avoid immediate retaliation, but close enough to make the geographic connection clear. The room filled with journalists, local officials, and curious citizens who'd heard rumors about explosive revelations concerning public corruption. Most expected a minor scandal, maybe a bribery case, maybe some financial impropriety. Nobody expected an 8-year-old girl to walk to the podium and dismantle Tennessee's power structure. Barbara wore the purple shirt and a small microphone that made her voice carry to every corner of the room. Beside her stood Sarah, veteran journalist with a reputation for breaking stories that ended careers. And behind her, Tony, John, and Marcus formed a wall of protection that was both literal and symbolic. "My name is Barbara Whitson," she began, and the room went silent. "I'm 8 years old. And I'm here to tell you about the people who were supposed to protect children like me but decided to hurt us instead." For 20 minutes, she spoke. Not crying, not breaking, just methodically laying out facts with a kind of terrible precision that came from having lived through nightmare and survived with her clarity intact. She named names, dates, locations. She described the warehouse, the ledgers, the photographs of other children who deserved justice but would never get it because they were already gone. And she played portions of the SD card videos, edited to protect victim identities but devastating in their implication. Timestamps matching financial transactions. Voices identifiable to anyone who'd heard them speak in public. Evidence so overwhelming that even the most corrupt defense attorney would struggle to explain it away. The room erupted. Journalists shouting questions. Officials trying to leave. Citizens demanding answers with the kind of righteous fury that topples governments. Outside, protesters were already gathering, not because they'd been organized, but because the live stream had gone viral, because social media was exploding with hashtags and demands for accountability, because sometimes the dam of public silence breaks all at once and the flood is unstoppable. In Clarksville, Evala Whitson watched the press conference from her jail cell, her perfect composure finally cracking. Her lawyer had promised bail, promised that charges would be reduced, promised that her connections would save her. But the lawyer wasn't returning calls anymore. And the cell phone she'd smuggled in, the one she'd paid a guard to provide, was lighting up with messages from associates cutting ties, from business partners lawyering up, from the network she'd built over 15 years collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. She'd underestimated the child. The same child she'd controlled with threats and violence and psychological torture for 8 years had become the thing she feared most, a witness with nothing left to lose. "Enjoy your moment," Evala whispered to the television screen showing Barbara's face. "It won't last. None of them do. And when this is over, when the attention fades and the public moves on to the next scandal, I'll still have resources. Still have friends. Still have ways to make problems disappear." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The machine was broken. The system was collapsing. And all because one small girl had decided that silence hurt more than speaking. Back at the press conference, Barbara was answering questions with a poise that made grown journalists weep. A woman in the front row, a mother by the protective way she clutched her daughter's hand, stood and spoke through tears. "What can we do? How do we help?" Barbara looked at her with those ancient eyes and said simply, "Believe children when they tell you they're not safe. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it implicates people you respect. Even when it's easier to look away." The room thundered with applause that lasted 4 minutes and felt like redemption. That night, back at the FBI safe house they'd been moved to, Mikey Reese appeared at the door. He looked smaller than Tony remembered, shoulders slumped, face hollow with the kind of guilt that eats from the inside. "I need to make this right," he said quietly. "Tell me what I can do." Diego's response was immediate. "Nothing. You've done enough damage." "Wait." Barbara had emerged from the bedroom where she'd been trying to sleep. "He knows things. About Senator Hale's network. About the people who haven't been caught yet. She looked at Mikey with an expression that mixed contempt with something like understanding. You were weak. But you don't have to stay weak. Mikey's eyes filled with tears. My sister, they got to Emma. She's in the hospital. Overdose. They made it look accidental, but I know it was a message. Then testify, John said. Make her suffering mean something. Give us everything you know about Hale's operation. Names, locations, payment schedules. Be the informant you should have been from the start. They'll kill me. Probably, Tony agreed. But you'll die on the right side for once. That count for anything. Mikey stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he nodded. There's one more SD card. The master card with the original files before Barbara made copies. Evala hid it somewhere Barbara wouldn't think to look. He swallowed hard. It's not in the doll. It's in the teddy bear. The one Barbara left at the house when she ran. Barbara gasped. Mr. Fuzzy. The teddy bear she'd had since she was 3 years old. The one she'd grabbed for but couldn't carry when she'd fled because the doll was more important. We need to get it, Marcus said immediately. If Evala's people figure out. They already have. Mikey's voice was hollow. I heard them talking. They're moving on the house tonight. Burning it to destroy evidence. The teddy bear burns with everything else unless we get there first. Tony checked his watch. 9:47 p.m. How long do we have? Maybe an hour. Maybe less. Not enough time to coordinate with FBI. Then we go alone, Diego said, checking his weapon. Fast and quiet. In and out before anyone knows we were there. It's a trap, John warned. Has to be. They'll be waiting for exactly this move. Doesn't matter, Barbara said, her small hand gripping the doll. Mr. Fuzzy was mine before everything went bad. Before Mama started hurting me. He's the last good thing from when I still thought mothers loved their children. Her voice cracked. And that SD card is the only thing that has all the files. Everything else is copies. Pieces. But that card? It's complete. It proves everything. Tony looked at his crew, Diego eager for violence, Marcus seeking redemption, John worried but resolute. And Barbara, 8 years old and impossibly brave, asking them to risk their lives one more time for a teddy bear and the truth it contained. All right, he said. Let's get your bear back. They left Mikey under guard, protective custody that was also prison, and headed into the Tennessee night toward a house that had been a crime scene and a horror show and was about to become a battlefield. The house on Pine Hollow Road looked exactly as Barbara remembered, yellow paint peeling, broken fence, the kind of cheerful suburban facade that hid hell in its floorboards. But now it was surrounded by shadows that moved with purpose, by vehicles with no plates, by the infrastructure of destruction. They were going to burn it within the hour. Tony, John, Marcus, and Diego approached from 4 directions, using darkness and training to bypass perimeter security that was professional but not perfect. Barbara had stayed at the safe house, or so they thought, until she appeared at Tony's elbow like a ghost, having followed them with a kind of quiet determination that made arguing pointless. Mr. Fuzzy's in my room, she whispered. 2nd floor, 3rd window. I can get there without anyone seeing if you distract them. Absolutely not. We don't have time to argue. They're already spreading accelerant. I can smell it. Her small hand gripped his. Trust me. Like I trusted you. Tony wanted to refuse. Wanted to send her back, keep her safe, protect her from one more goddamn trauma in a life that had been nothing but. But she was right. They were out of time. 5 minutes, he said. You have 5 minutes. After that, we're pulling out whether you have the bear or not. Barbara nodded and disappeared into the darkness with a kind of skill that came from years of making herself invisible in her own home. Tony keyed his radio. All units, we're go. Make some noise. Diego kicked in the back door. Marcus triggered the motion sensors on the south side. John disabled the power, plunging the house into darkness that was broken only by flashlights and the orange glow of men scrambling to respond. And Barbara slipped through the chaos like smoke, climbing the trellis she'd used 100 times to escape Evala's late-night business meetings, crawling through the window of what had been her prison cell for 8 years. The room was exactly as she'd left it, frozen sheets on the bed, crayons scattered on the desk, and sitting on the pillow like he'd been waiting for her return, Mr. Fuzzy. She grabbed him, pressed her face into his worn fur, and for just a moment let herself be a child who'd found a lost friend. Then she felt the hardness inside his stuffing. The rectangular shape that didn't belong. The final SD card. She had it. She'd actually. The bedroom door opened. Evelyn Whitson stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by emergency lighting, holding a gun that looked obscene in her manicured hands. "Hello, Barbara," she said quietly. "I was hoping you'd come." And outside, the house erupted in flames. Chapter 9, Trial, Truth, and New Names. The flames climbed the walls like judgment given form, orange and hungry and cleansing. Smoke poured through the hallway behind Evelyn, turning her silhouette into something demonic, something pulled from the hell she'd created in this house over 8 years of systematic abuse. "Put the bear down, Barbara," Evelyn commanded, her voice steady despite the inferno consuming her empire. "Put it down and come with me. We can still fix this. Mother and daughter, victims of a terrible misunderstanding. They'll believe us if we present a united front." Barbara clutched Mr. Fuzzy tighter, feeling the SD card's hard edge through the worn fabric. "You're not my mother. Not anymore. Maybe you never were. I fed you, clothed you, gave you a home when your father abandoned us. You sold me." Barbara's voice cracked but held. "You sold other kids. You built an empire on broken children and called it business. And now you want me to lie for you? To pretend it was all a misunderstanding?" Evelyn's mask finally shattered completely. The gun rose, no longer pointed at the floor but at her daughter's chest. "I gave you everything, you ungrateful little." The window exploded inward as Tony came through it, glass and wood frame fragmenting around his bulk. He hit the floor rolling, came up with his Glock drawn, and put himself between Barbara and the woman who'd birthed her but never loved her. "Drop it, Evelyn." "Or what?" Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "You'll shoot me? In front of the child? Make her watch her mother die." "You stopped being her mother the first time you let a stranger hurt her," Tony said quietly. "Now you're just a defendant who's run out of exits." Behind Evelyn, the flames roared closer. The house was accelerant-soaked, designed to burn fast and hot and leave no evidence. But fire doesn't discriminate between evidence and flesh, and the heat was already blistering, unbearable. "We're all burning," Evelyn said, her composure cracking into something manic. "All of us. This house, this evidence, all of it turns to ash and nobody proves anything." John appeared in the doorway behind her, moving with the silent precision of his medic days. His arm wrapped around her throat in a chokehold, not to kill, just to control, and the gun clattered to the floor. "Barbara, go!" John shouted, struggling to hold a woman fighting with the strength of desperation. "Tony, get her out." Tony grabbed Barbara and Mr. Fuzzy, hoisted her onto his back, and went through the window the way he'd come, trusting training and adrenaline to navigate the 2-story drop. He hit the trellis, rode it down as it tore from the house, landed hard on overgrown grass that probably saved both their lives. Behind them, John half-carried, half-dragged Evelyn through the smoke-filled hall, downstairs that were already collapsing, out the front door as the house groaned like a dying beast. They made it to the street as the second floor caved in, sending sparks spiraling into the Tennessee night like dying stars. Fire trucks arrived 6 minutes later. Police 12 minutes after that. And by the time the flames were extinguished, all that remained of the house on Pine Hollow Road was scorched foundation and the ghost of secrets that had finally been forced into light. Evelyn Whitson was arrested in an ambulance, treated for smoke inhalation and second-degree burns, read her rights while Barbara watched from Marcus's arms, still clutching the teddy bear that held the final piece of evidence. "I want to press charges," Barbara said quietly. "Against her. Against all of them. I want to testify." The FBI agent taking her statement, a woman named Chun with kind eyes and 20 years hunting predators, knelt to her level. "Sweetheart, you've been through so much. Are you sure you want to relive it in court?" "I'm sure," Barbara said. "Because if I don't, somebody else's mama will do the same thing to somebody else's kid. And I can't let that happen if I can stop it." Agent Chen's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away professionally. "Then we'll make sure you're protected. And we'll make sure they hear every word." The trial began 4 months later in federal court, where jurisdiction and conspiracy charges meant Evala and her network couldn't hide behind local corruption. The courthouse in Nashville was surrounded by protesters, some supporting Barbara, some claiming she was a liar, most just drawn by the spectacle of power being held accountable. The prosecution's case was methodical, devastating. They played the SD card videos, edited for public consumption but damning in their clarity. They presented the ledgers showing payments to judges, cops, CPS workers. They called witnesses, children Evala had trafficked who'd survived, FBI agents who traced the money, forensic accountants who'd unraveled the shell companies. But the moment that broke the defense came on day 7. Tony Gatson took the stand. Not as a defendant or a criminal. As a guardian. As a man who'd chosen to protect a child when everyone else, every institution, every official, every person supposed to help, had failed her. Mr. Gatson, the prosecutor asked, why did you risk your life for Barbara Whitson? Tony was silent for a long moment, his scarred hands gripping the witness box rail. Because nobody else would. Because I've seen what happens when good people decide something isn't their problem. I saw it in Iraq. I saw it when my daughter was dying and insurance companies played games with her treatment. I saw it in Barbara's eyes when she ran into that road begging for help. His voice roughened. And I decided I was done being a bystander. Done watching children suffer because adults are too comfortable or too corrupt or too scared to act. Did you kidnap Barbara Whitson? I protected her from people who were trying to kill her. If that's kidnapping, then I'm guilty and I'd do it again. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, called for order, but the damage was done. Tony had spoken the truth that everyone felt but few acknowledged. Sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing, and sometimes choosing justice means breaking laws written to protect the guilty. When Barbara took the stand 3 days later, she was small in the witness box, feet barely touching the floor. But her voice was clear as she identified Evala, as she described years of systematic abuse, as she explained how she'd hidden the evidence because she knew, even at 8 years old, that adults who were supposed to protect children were the ones destroying them. Do you hate your mother? The defense attorney asked, trying to establish bias. Barbara thought about it, really considered the question. No, she said finally. I feel sorry for her. Because she had a chance to love me, and she chose money instead. And now she has money and lawyers and nice clothes, but she doesn't have love. She doesn't have family. She doesn't have anything real. She looked directly at Evala for the first time. I have Tony and John and Marcus and Diego. I have people who chose to love me even when it was hard. You could have had that too if you'd just been a mama instead of a business. Evala's composure finally cracked. She lunged from the defense table, screaming accusations and threats, calling Barbara ungrateful and vindictive and worse things that the bailiffs cut short by restraining her and removing her from the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Senator Richard Hale was convicted in a separate trial 2 weeks later. Judge Malcolm Hayes was disbarred and sentenced to 12 years. Detective Shaw was already dead, shot during the warehouse raid, his corruption dying with him. 7 other officials were convicted, sentenced, stripped of their power and their pretense of respectability. The system hadn't worked perfectly. Some conspirators cut deals. Some escaped prosecution on technicalities. Some would probably return to similar crimes once public attention faded. But the machine was broken. The network was exposed. And every predator who'd hidden behind badges and titles now knew that children could fight back, that evidence could survive, that justice, delayed and imperfect but real, could still happen. 6 months later, Barbara Whitson, now Barbara Gatson, adoption paperwork pending, sat in a classroom at Riverside Elementary, working on a math problem that didn't involve ledgers or payments or keeping track of men who hurt children. Her pencil scratched across paper, solving for X in equations that had simple, clear answers. At recess, some kids asked about the trial. About the news coverage. About whether she was the girl from the videos everyone's parents whispered about. She told them the truth. I'm the girl who told the truth when everybody else was lying. And that made some people mad, but it made other people safe. Most kids understood. Some didn't. That was okay. Barbara was learning that you couldn't make everyone believe you, couldn't force people to care. You just kept telling the truth and let it do its work. In the parking lot, Tony and John sat on their Harleys, waiting for school to let out. They'd become official foster parents 2 months ago, with adoption finalization scheduled for next spring. The Road Kings MC had pivoted from riding club to advocacy organization, using their reputation and connections to help other trafficked children navigate the system that had failed them. They called it the Tommy O'Brien Foundation. The big man who died protecting Barbara had become their symbol, proof that redemption was possible, that broken people could still build beautiful things. As they waited, John noticed something new on the school's exterior wall, a mural, painted by the art class, showing a small girl with cornrows and a doll, surrounded by words in bright colors. Brave little girl. Truth teller. Survivor. She's gonna hate that, Tony said, but he was smiling. Probably, John agreed. But she'll grow into it. Give her 10 years, she'll be the one painting murals for other kids who need to know that speaking up matters. The bell rang. Children poured out of the school like water released from a dam. Loud, chaotic, joyful in the way only kids can be when they're safe and free and ordinary. Barbara emerged with 2 friends, girls she'd met in art class who didn't care about her past, who just wanted to trade Pokemon cards and argue about which boy band was better. She saw Tony and John, waved, said goodbye to her friends, and walked toward the bikes with a kind of casual confidence that came from knowing she had people who'd catch her if she fell. She still had nightmares sometimes. Still flinched at loud noises. Still checked door locks obsessively and kept Mr. Fuzzy close at night even though the SD card had been logged into evidence and used to convict her abusers. Trauma didn't heal on a schedule. Didn't follow a narrative arc that resolved neatly. But she was healing. Slowly. In fits and starts. With setbacks and breakthroughs and days when getting out of bed felt like victory enough. Good day. Tony asked as she climbed onto the back of his bike, helmet on, backpack secure. Pretty good, Barbara said. I got an A on my social studies report. And Mrs. Patterson said I'm getting better at fractions. That's my girl, Tony said, and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. They rode home through Clarksville, past the courthouse where justice had happened, past the empty lot where Rusty's Roadhouse was being rebuilt with insurance money and community donations, past the warehouse that was now federal evidence and probably would be for years. The town was healing too. Slower than anyone wanted, faster than skeptics expected. Corrupt officials had been replaced. New protocols were in place. Children's advocacy centers were opening, funded by donations from people who'd seen Barbara's testimony and decided to do something instead of nothing. It wasn't perfect. Systems built over decades didn't transform overnight. But it was better. Measurably, demonstrably better. And that was enough for today. At home, a modest house in a quiet neighborhood where nobody judged bikers as parents and kids played in yards without supervision, John had dinner waiting. Spaghetti, Barbara's favorite, with garlic bread and the kind of normal domesticity that felt miraculous after everything they'd survived. After dinner, Barbara did homework at the kitchen table while Tony and John washed dishes and argued about whether the Titans had any chance of making the playoffs. The radio played country music. The dog, a rescue mutt they'd adopted last month, slept under the table, occasionally thumping his tail against Barbara's feet. It was ordinary. Beautifully, perfectly ordinary. Later, after Barbara was asleep, Tony and John sat on the porch with beers and the comfortable silence of men who'd been through hell together and come out the other side. Think we did right by her? John asked. Yeah, Tony said. I think we did. Not perfectly, but right. Tommy would be proud. He'd probably say we went soft. Traded bikes for parent-teacher conferences. Maybe. John smiled. But he'd mean it as a compliment. Above them, stars appeared in the Tennessee sky, the same stars that had watched humans fail and succeed and fail again for millennia, indifferent to individual suffering but witness to collective progress. And somewhere in that vast and terrible and beautiful universe, the truth that one small girl had dragged into light continued to ripple outward, changing laws and hearts and the fundamental assumption that power could abuse without consequence forever. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next. Click on the image or video showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.